The sterile lights of the orbital medical bay flickered once, then steadied. The hum of filtration systems blended with the low, wet hiss of the fluid tanks along the walls. A tall, violet-skinned alien in a white coat leaned over the examination table, holding a scanner the length of a forearm. Its 3 fingers moved with deliberate care. The being's name was Halzek, and he'd been the chief trauma surgeon aboard the Virellian research vessel for over a century. The human on the table blinked slowly, his face pale and drawn, lips dry. His arm was immobilized in a gel brace, and his left leg was elevated, wrapped tightly in a compression sheath. Bruises bloomed across his ribs like dark clouds beneath the skin. His name was Kellan Rourke, and he looked like he'd just been pulled out of a meat grinder. Halzek moved the scanner along Kellan's midsection, pausing at her raised, pale line just below the bottom rib, slightly off-center. "This scar," Halzek said, his voice a low echo from the translator pinned to his shoulder, "was not inflicted during the collapse on Tarsis V. It is older." "Significant tissue disruption. What caused it?" Kellan turned his head slightly toward the alien, squinting through the overhead light. "Oh, that," he rasped, his voice dry. "I forgot about it." Halzek tilted his head. "You forgot?" "Yeah, got it years ago." "Didn't think it'd still show up like that." "I require clarification. You forgot about an injury severe enough to leave a scar of this magnitude?" Kellan's chest rose and fell slowly. He licked his lips, winced, and said, "Well, I was 13, fell off a roof trying to get a baseball. Landed on a rusted metal pipe, went straight in, had to get emergency surgery. They pulled it out, patched me up. I was out of school for a month." Halzek blinked his large, black eyes. "A metal pipe impaled you and you forgot about it." Kellan gave a tired shrug. "Wasn't the first time I got hurt, or the last." Halzek stepped back, staring. "Human physiology continues to unsettle." The door to the bay hissed open. A second alien entered, smaller, with orange-tinted skin and a notepad shimmering with notes. Halzek waved it off silently. He had more pressing concerns. "You were recovered from beneath nearly 3 meters of collapsed ferrocrete," Halzek said, returning his attention to Kellan. "Your leg was fractured in 2 places. The arm had a compound break, 8 ribs bruised, 1 cracked. Internal bruising and signs of oxygen deprivation. And still, you failed to mention this abdominal scar." "I had other things on my mind," Kellan muttered. "Like breathing." Halzek moved to the console and tapped a sequence. A holographic overlay projected Kellan's injuries in red. "I am not questioning your pain threshold, but your memory retention. This pattern of disregard for severe injury is common among your species." "That's not disregard," Kellan said. "It's just priorities. You get used to stuff." Halzek turned back to him. "You are not used to impalement. You'd be surprised." The alien made a sound that could have passed for a sigh. "How long until full recovery by human standards?" Kellan closed his eyes. "Leg'll take 6 weeks, maybe longer if there's ligament damage. Arm, similar. I'll need physio." "The ribs'll hurt for a while, but they'll heal. Just don't make me laugh." "I will note that," Halzek said. "What about your lungs? Feel like someone set fire to them, but I'm breathing. That's good, right?" Halzek stared at him. "Your optimism is noted, it is." Unnerving. Later that cycle, Kellan was transferred to a recovery suite. The walls were lined with soft glow panels and the air smelled faintly of citrus and minerals. He sat propped up on the bed, one leg elevated, his right arm in a sling. A nurse came in another Virellian, this one with pale green skin and a softer voice. "You require nourishment," she said, setting down a tray. "Nutrient paste and filtered water." Kellan eyed the paste. "Looks like wallpaper glue. It contains all required human vitamins and proteins." He took a tentative bite and grimaced. "Tastes like glue too." "You endured a building collapse. You can tolerate this." He laughed, then winced. "Bad call, ribs." The nurse adjusted his bed slightly. "You should rest. Halzek wishes to conduct further scans tomorrow." "Great," Kellan muttered. More poking. 3 days passed. Halzek returned each day, running scans, asking questions. He seemed increasingly troubled by Kellan's extensive injury history. "You have 2 healed fractures on your left hand," Halzek said on the 4th day. "When did this occur?" Kellan scratched his head. "A high school bike accident, went over the handlebars, broke 2 fingers. You never received bone reinforcement?" "Nope, just a cast." Halzek paced the room. "And the scar along your right thigh?" "Rottweiler bite. Neighbor's dog got loose." "And the burn mark on your left shoulder?" "Kettle accident. I was 5. Halzek stopped pacing. "You are not a soldier. You are an ambassadorial technician. How have you sustained more trauma than a frontline Kirlan shock trooper?" Kellan shrugged as best he could. "Earth's not exactly bubble-wrapped." Halzek sat heavily on a stool. "I once believed your species was simply biologically resilient. I now believe it is behavioral. You sustain damage and persist without adequate caution." "We're not trying to get hurt," Kellan said. "It just happens, and then you deal with it." "By forgetting impalements," Kellan chuckled carefully. "That one wasn't intentional either." By the 2nd week, Kellan was able to move with the help of a hover assist walker. His leg still ached and his arm remained in a support brace, but he could make slow circuits around the recovery wing. Halzek often joined him, asking more questions. "Do you experience phantom pain from these older injuries?" "Sometimes, mostly if the weather changes." "You are in orbit." "I know, it's just a saying." Halzek blinked. "Explain." Kellan sighed. "Never mind." On the 14th day, Kellan had a surprise visitor. Captain Drevis, a human from another embassy ship, arrived with a care package. Real Earth snacks, a paperback novel, and a fleece blanket with the Chicago skyline printed on it. "You look like hell," Drevis said, pulling up a chair. "Feel worse," Kellan said. "But thanks for the chips. I heard about the collapse. You were lucky." Kellan looked down at his leg. "Define lucky." Drevis leaned forward. "You know Halzek's been writing a report on you, right? Something about the psychological implications of trauma normalization in human aid specialists." "Fantastic," Kellan muttered. "I'm a case study now. You forgot an abdominal impalement. That's not normal." Kellan rubbed his temples. "I didn't forget, I just didn't think it mattered anymore." Drevis raised an eyebrow. "It left a scar." "Lots of things do." Halzek called Kellan in for a final evaluation on day 22. The human walked carefully, still stiff but upright. The alien motioned for him to lie down on the scanner bed. "Your injuries have healed within expected parameters. You will require physical therapy for another 3 to 5 weeks. Sounds about right." Halzek hesitated. "I have revised my initial medical report. Let me guess. Humans are irrational and injury-prone." "Incorrect," Halzek said. "You are adaptable, but not in the way I first believed. You adapt by minimizing, reframing, and pressing forward, not because you are fearless, but because you must." Kellan looked at him. "That's weirdly accurate." Halzek placed a datapad beside the scanner. "I still do not understand how one forgets being impaled." Kellan lay back and stared at the ceiling. "I didn't forget the pain, or the hospital, or the stitches. I just didn't think it was worth bringing up, not compared to now." Halzek nodded slowly. "Then perhaps resilience is not in your biology, but in your decisions." Kellan gave a small, careful smile. "We've had practice." The alien surgeon turned off the scanner. "You are clear to return to duty once rehabilitation is complete. Avoid collapsing buildings." "I'll do my best." 1 month later, Kellan stood on the landing platform, a duffel slung over his good shoulder. His leg still twinged, but he could walk. He paused beside Halzek, who stood stiffly, hands behind his back. "You were not the easiest patient," Halzek said. "Wouldn't be the first time I heard that. But you were the most illuminating." Kellan extended a hand. "Thanks for keeping me in one piece." Halzek stared at the hand, then shook it carefully. "Do not get impaled again." "I'll try." As Kellan boarded the shuttle, he paused and looked back. "Hey, Halzek." "Yes, still think forgetting a scar's weird." "Unquestionably." Kellan grinned. "Good, I'd be worried if you didn't." The shuttle door closed, engines humming. The human disappeared into the stars, one scar among many, some remembered, some not. "And Halzek?" chief trauma surgeon of the Virellian fleet, updated his report with one final sentence. Humans may forget their scars, but they do not forget how to survive. The first time Kellan stood without assistance, he nearly fell into the tray of dermal sealant cartridges stacked beside the sink. Halzek caught him with one long arm, steadying him before the impact. "You are not yet structurally stable," Halzek said. "You require balance recalibration." "You try walking after lying down for nearly a month," Kellan muttered. He took a breath, let it out slowly, and tried again. This time he managed 3 steps before his knee buckled. Halzek made a note on his tablet. "Your center of mass appears to have shifted slightly. Compensation strategy?" "Left hip forward lean," Kellan said. "Feels more natural that way." "Suboptimal but functional," Halzek replied. "Proceed." Kellan limped across the small rehab space, arms slightly out for balance. The pale blue walls were lined with recessed lighting and faintly humming diagnostics equipment. A low bench sat against the far wall, and he made it there after a slow, careful shuffle. Halzek followed, scanning his gait. "Pain level, 6, maybe 7, Kellan said, sitting down. "Mostly in the ankle, something's pulling wrong." "Residual inflammation of the peroneal tendon," Halzek said. "Your brace is misaligned." "I will adjust it." He knelt swiftly, his 3 fingers deftly unlatching the brace's side panel. Kellan winced as the pressure shifted, then exhaled. Halzek looked up. "Better?" "Yeah, that's better. You ever think about opening a podiatry clinic?" "I do not know what that is." "Don't worry." It wasn't a serious suggestion. Halzek stood and tapped something into the wall panel. A low chime sounded, and a series of red indicators slid into green. "You are cleared for unsupervised walking within this quadrant," Halzek said. "Limit to 100 meters per cycle. No incline." "No stress testing." Kellan raised an eyebrow. "I'll try not to enter any marathons." Halzek blinked once, then turned slightly. "I will assume that is sarcasm. Correct assumption." Halzek studied him for a long moment. "Your humor appears to increase in proportion to physical discomfort." Kellan shrugged. "It's a coping mechanism. Do all humans employ it? Not all. Some just curse a lot." Halzek turned back to the panel. "I have observed both tendencies. Neither is medically useful." Kellan leaned back against the wall, exhaling. "They help us stay sane. That's useful in its own way." There was a pause. The faint hum of the ventilation system filled the quiet. "I spoke with your embassy," Halzek said at last. "They offered to retrieve you for extended terrestrial recovery." "Yeah, they mentioned that. I said no." "You declined an offer of planetary convalescence?" Kellan looked down at his brace. "I need to finish what I started. I was overseeing the Tarsis relief coordination." "That project's still active. You collapsed under part of that project." "Exactly why I want to see it through." Halzek stepped back. "This is not an uncommon human behavior. You attach personal meaning to incomplete outcomes. But your physical readiness is not guaranteed. I'll take that risk. You already have." Kellan gave a small grin. "And I'm still here." An alert chimed softly from the wall. Halzek moved to silence it. "Your physical progress is within acceptable parameters," he said. "But your neurological patterns are inconsistent." Kellan frowned. "Inconsistent how?" "Your REM cycle durations are truncated. Cortisol levels remain elevated even during rest states. You are not sleeping properly." Kellan rubbed his face. "I've never been a great sleeper. Your species requires it." "Yeah, well, I get by." Halzek tilted his head. "That is not the same as recovery, I know." The alien paused, then crossed the room to a small drawer and retrieved a narrow vial of pale amber liquid. "This is a sleep stabilizer. Non-habit forming. It mimics a natural melatonin response. I recommend using it tonight." Kellan took the vial, turning it in his fingers. "Thanks. You will not heal fully without rest." "I'll try it." Halzek turned to leave, then hesitated at the door. "You are one of 7 survivors recovered from the collapse, the only one ambulatory at this stage." Kellan looked up. "What about the engineer from Deck 5, still in suspended stasis? Severe spinal trauma. Prognosis is uncertain." Kellan nodded slowly, then glanced at the vial again. That night, after lights dimmed and the corridor quieted, he lay on the biofoam mattress staring at the ceiling. The vial sat on the table beside him, unopened. He finally reached over, uncapped it, and drank. The next morning, he woke feeling something strange, rested. Not perfect, not pain-free, but whole in a way he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Halzek met him in the rehab wing at second cycle. "You have improved muscle fiber response," Halzek said, scanning his leg. "Your walking pattern has stabilized. Feels more natural today." "I actually slept." The stabilizer performed as expected. Kellan flexed his ankle gently. "Don't suppose you have something that fixes the rest of this?" Halzek tapped the side of his console. "I am not authorized for miracles," Kellan chuckled. "Shame." Later that afternoon, Halzek brought him to a different part of the ship, an observation platform just aft of the engineering ring. The view stretched wide, showing the fractured remains of the Tarsis station in orbit below, lit in stark contrast by the planet's twin suns. "You brought me here for sightseeing?" Kellan asked. "Perspective," Halzek replied. "You expressed a desire to finish your project. You should see the scale of what remains." Kellan stepped closer to the transparent barrier. Jagged hulls, bent support beams, and shattered cargo modules drifted in slow spirals. Small repair drones zipped between them. "Looks worse from here," he said. "It is worse than you believe," Halzek said. "The structural collapse was not limited to your quadrant." The entire North Corridor sheared clean away. 18 compartments depressurized. Kellan stared. "They didn't tell me that. You were not stable enough to process it at the time." He was quiet for a while, watching the rotation of debris. Anyone still out there? Unlikely. "All life signs were accounted for within 30 standard hours. You were among the last recovered." Kellan shifted his weight. "I remember falling. The floor gave out under my boots. I grabbed a support strut, but it broke off. Next thing I knew, I was in the dark." "Everything hurt. You were buried beneath 3 collapsed decks. The rescue team found you by heat signature." "Well," Kellan said, "good thing I run hot." Halzek looked at him. "You joke again. Habit. I suggest you form new ones." Kellan turned back to the window. "You think I can make a difference down there?" Halzek didn't answer immediately. "You already have." They stood in silence for a while, the stars beyond the wreckage blinking coldly. By the end of the week, Kellan had begun short walks outside the medical wing. The corridors were busier beyond the recovery zone, filled with soft-voiced aliens in various uniforms. Most gave him a wide berth. A few stared openly, Halzek noticed. "They have not encountered many humans in this condition, injured, mobile after such injury." Kellan adjusted the strap on his shoulder bag. "Nice to be a novelty. You are not merely that. Your case has been referenced in 3 medical symposiums already." "Oh no," Kellan groaned. "I'm a slideshow," Halzek nodded. "Slide 7 to be exact. Fantastic." At the end of that cycle, Halzek handed him a folded piece of synth pulp paper. "What's this?" Kellan asked. "An authorization." "You are permitted to return to the surface with the next transport." Kellan unfolded the paper. The print was sharp, the seal genuine. "You sure about this? You are competent to resume light duties, provided you maintain rehabilitation protocols." Kellan grinned. "You're really letting me go? I am not detaining you. You have been free to leave since day 28. You could have mentioned that earlier. You were not ready." Kellan folded the paper again and slipped it into his jacket. "Thanks for fixing me up." Halzek inclined his head. "You fixed yourself. I merely provided alignment." As Kellan turned to leave, Halzek spoke once more. "Your species' ability to endure is not a mystery to me now, but I will never understand your willingness to laugh through it." Kellan paused in the doorway. "That's the only part that makes it bearable." Then he walked out, a little straighter than before. The transport vessel dipped through the upper layers of Tarsis's atmosphere with a faint tremor that rattled the bolt plates in its cabin walls. Kellan sat in the forward section, strapped into a safety harness that pressed uncomfortably against his ribs. The stiffness in his leg had quieted to a dull hum manageable now, though his ankle still sent the occasional sharp protest if he shifted too fast. Across from him sat a Virellian logistics officer, pale blue with faint lattice patterns across her cheek ridges. She glanced at him for the third time without speaking. "You can ask," Kellan said, her pupils narrowed slightly. "You were the one buried, yes. I was the one who got lucky," he said. "Luckier than most." She tapped her datapad with two elongated fingers. "You've been cleared for site work. Light duties, no lifting, no climbing, no heroics. I'm allowed to point at things and make suggestions. Maybe wave my arms slowly if something's on fire." She nodded once and returned to her screen. Kellan leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. The descent lasted 20 more minutes, punctuated by the occasional shift in gravity as the ship adjusted vector. When they landed, the harness released with a soft hiss. The surface smelled different than he remembered, sharper, metallic, and tainted faintly with ozone. Too many pressure welds and synthetic polymers in the air. The field base was sturdier than the last time he'd seen it, its support structures reinforced with segmented plating and a lattice of temporary shelters stretching toward the ridge. He stepped down the ramp slowly, testing the weight distribution on his leg. A faint jolt shot up through his ankle, but it leveled out within seconds. He walked with measured steps toward the central operations tent, where a squat, green-hued alien with a face like folded bark was speaking into a comm unit. "You're Rourke," the creature said without looking up. "Still am," Kellan replied. "Thought you'd be flatter." "Appreciate the vote of confidence." The alien turned, revealing a set of iridescent eyes and a half-crushed shoulder plate. "Grentel, Civil Stabilization Overseer. You're here to review the logistics channel for the West Corridor. That's the plan." Grentel gestured toward the tent. "You're late. The corridor's half demolished. You'll be walking through shattered ductwork and exposed data lines." "Your leg up for that?" "I've walked through worse," Kellan said. "I've read your chart, apparently." Inside the tent, a series of monitors displayed thermal overlays of the damaged sectors. Kellan leaned over one, eyeing the power distribution map. Several nodes blinked yellow. "What's the failure rate on these?" he asked. 37%. The supports were never meant for atmospheric shifts. The pressure gradients fluctuate every 6 hours. "There's your instability," Kellan muttered. "You've got flexion stress across the lower girder lines." "They're bending instead of absorbing," Grentel grunted. "And the fix? You need to decouple the bottom struts and install variable tension dampers. Otherwise, the corridor's going to keep buckling every time the temperature drops. Those dampers aren't on site. Then call up to orbit. You've got at least 2 freighters in holding pattern. One of them's bound to have modular kits." Grentel tapped his comm. "This better be right." Outside, the wind had picked up not natural wind, but the forced kind that came from pressure vents misaligned by structural shifts. It whistled low through the gaps in the temporary walls, creating a sound like a distant kettle boiling. Kellan pulled on a utility vest and stepped back out. The path to the West Corridor was uneven, scattered with cracked pavement slabs and half-melted conduit sheaths. He moved slowly, favoring the good side of his body without making it obvious. Pride was insidious on sites like this. Show too much weakness, and people started assigning you clipboard duties. At the base of the corridor entrance, a trio of engineers were examining a support beam that had twisted like a candy cane. One of them was human, early 20s, buzzed hair, nervous hands. The other 2 were Virellian, both wearing hazard visors. "You with engineering?" the young man asked. "No," Kellan said. "I'm here to tell you everything you did wrong." The man blinked. "Oh, you're him." Kellan crouched beside the beam, ignoring the twinge in his hip. "This isn't a failure of craftsmanship. The materials weren't stress-rated for dual gravity zones. You're getting harmonic vibration every time the orbital platform shifts position." One of the Virelians tapped her visor. "Should we replace the whole beam?" "Not if you want the rest of the corridor to collapse when you take the tension off." You need to anchor it from both ends first, then cut it in segments. The younger human looked uncertain. Is that standard? No, Kellan said. It's practical. They spent the next 2 hours stabilizing the section enough to begin controlled disassembly. Kellan stayed nearby, not doing anything physical himself, but directing placement, pacing out distances and verifying torque settings. His leg ached not sharply, but in that deep, persistent way bones do after trauma. He drank water when he remembered and leaned against a crate when no one was looking. By late afternoon, the corridor was cleared enough to allow drone passage. Grentel returned, his shoulder patch now streaked with dust. The dampers are en route, he said. You were right. Kellan looked up. That's rare. You're an unorthodox addition, Rourke, Grentel said. You limp, you argue with the stabilizers, and your jokes are bad, but the corridor's holding. Appreciate the feedback. Grentel crossed his arms. You planning to stay? Until the site's stable. Then don't get buried again. We're short on surgeons. Over the next 4 days, the pace of work increased. Kellan didn't push himself beyond limits, but he stayed involved, diagramming reinforcement layouts, cross-checking material specs, and arguing for rerouting the water lines to avoid another pressure rupture. He spoke little about what had happened before. When asked, he simply said he'd been lucky. The others didn't press. On places like this, you didn't ask for the full story unless someone offered it. On the 5th night, while reviewing a power grid schematic under a portable lamp, a soft chime sounded from his calm. He tapped it. Halzek's face appeared, slightly pixelated from the signal lag. You are upright, Halzek noted, mostly. Your posture has improved, your humor remains intact. Can't fix everything. Halzek paused. I reviewed the structural logs from your site. You provided unconventional reinforcement strategies. They were effective. They were not in the standard manual. There's a lot of things we do that aren't in manuals. Halzek's face twitched slightly. You are no longer under my care. But I find myself verifying your survival regardless. Kellan leaned back in his seat. That a professional habit, perhaps something less clinical. They didn't speak for a moment. The wind outside rattled the side of the tent. I'm not going to forget this one, Kellan said. Meaning the corridor, meaning the whole damn thing. Halzek nodded once. That is acceptable. The transmission ended. Kellan turned back to the grid display. He adjusted a line, erased another, then leaned back, letting out a breath that had been sitting in his chest too long. The corridor was holding. The site was stable. And for once there were no sirens, no collapsing decks, no panicked comm calls. Just the low hum of power returning to a place that had nearly come apart. He stood slowly, stretching his back. The pain was still there, ghostly, familiar, but it no longer dictated his rhythm. Outside, the artificial lights glowed pale gold against the dusk, and the air smelled like fresh welds and warm soil. He didn't forget the scars, not this time, but he walked anyway.